He did not send flowers to the woman he once promised to protect. He sent lawyers, a moving truck, and an eviction notice at 8:07 in the morning. Evelyn Carter had just placed 3 white tulips in a glass vase on the dining table when the doorbell rang. Outside, the Connecticut sky hung low and gray, pressing rain against the windows in thin silver lines. The old house smelled of coffee, lemon polish, and the faint cedar scent from the staircase she had sanded by hand 15 years earlier, back when love still sounded like a promise instead of a contract. She wiped her fingers on a folded dish towel and walked to the front door without hurry. Through the frosted glass, she saw dark coats, polished shoes, and the black shine of 3 SUVs parked along the curb. Behind them sat a moving truck with its rear door already lifted, empty cardboard boxes stacked inside like open mouths waiting to swallow what was left of her life. When Evelyn opened the door, Grant Holloway stood on the porch with 2 attorneys behind him, both holding leather folders against the rain. He was tall, silver-haired, and dressed like a man who believed expensive wool could make cruelty look professional. Beside him, Madison Blake, a younger associate with careful eyes, looked down at the papers in her hands instead of at Evelyn's face. Grant extended a cream-colored envelope. The red seal at the bottom had already blurred at the edge from the damp air. "Mrs. Carter," he said, using the name Preston had tried to make small, "we are here to remove you from the property." He said it loudly enough for the gardener across the street to pause beside his mower, and for a curtain to shift in the second-floor window next door. Evelyn did not reach for the envelope right away. Her gaze moved past Grant to the moving truck, then to the embossed logo on the folder in Madison's arms. Holloway and Pierce Legal Group. The same firm Preston had bragged about at dinner parties, the same firm that had helped him turn their divorce into a maze of locked doors and fine print. On the porch railing, rainwater gathered in a clear bead, trembled, and fell. Grant cleared his throat. "Your former husband has given formal notice. You have until noon to surrender the premises voluntarily." Noon. As if 15 years could be folded, taped, and carried out before lunch. Evelyn finally accepted the envelope. Her hand was steady. The paper was cold. Behind Grant, Madison's phone buzzed once inside her coat pocket, but she ignored it. Another buzz followed, softer this time, almost swallowed by the rain. Evelyn noticed. Grant did not. From somewhere inside the lead SUV, a phone screen glowed. Preston Whitmore's face appeared, smiling from a bright penthouse room. His new fiancée blurred behind him like expensive furniture. "Evelyn," he said through the speaker, smooth and amused, "please do not make this embarrassing." She looked at the man who had once promised this house would always be hers too. Then she looked at the firm name again. A quiet breath passed through her. "Mr. Holloway," she said, calm enough to make the rain sound louder. "Before you remove anyone from anywhere, you may want to check the email your office received this morning." Grant frowned. Madison finally reached into her pocket. The screen lit her face pale. Her eyes moved once across the message, then stopped on the first line. "Evelyn Carter, Chairwoman." The porch went silent. For 3 seconds, no one on that porch moved, and in those 3 seconds Preston Whitmore still believed silence belonged to him. On the phone screen inside the black sport utility vehicle, his smile held steady, bright, and polished, the kind of smile he used at charity dinners and real estate closings, the kind that made people mistake confidence for character. He had planned this morning carefully. Not at dawn, when the street was empty. Not after dark, when shame could hide behind porch lights. He chose 8 o'clock, when dog walkers passed the curb, when sprinklers ticked across green lawns, when neighbors carried travel mugs to their cars and pretended not to stare. He wanted Evelyn seen. He wanted the moving truck in front of her house, like a public verdict. He wanted cardboard boxes stacked beneath her windows, wanted 3 attorneys in dark coats standing at her door, wanted the whole block to understand that he had moved on and she had been moved out. Years ago, that same porch had smelled of fresh paint and cut grass. Evelyn remembered Preston standing beside her with his sleeves rolled up, holding 2 paper cups of coffee from a gas station 2 miles away because they had spent nearly every dollar on the down payment. The house had not been grand then. The gutters sagged. The kitchen floor dipped near the stove. The upstairs bathroom made a knocking sound every time the heat came on. But Evelyn had loved it with the devotion people save for things they build with tired hands. She had scraped old wallpaper from the dining room until her fingers ached. She had planted hydrangeas along the fence because Preston's mother said blue flowers made a home feel lucky. She had turned a narrow spare room into his first office, measuring the shelves herself, labeling tax receipts in shoeboxes, making dinner after midnight, while Preston practiced investor calls in front of a cracked mirror. Back then, he called her his anchor. Later, when the money came, he said anchor like it meant wait. The memory passed through her without changing her face. Rain tapped softly against the envelope in her hand. Grant Holloway did not know any of this. To him, she was an entry in a file, a former spouse, a woman standing in a cream sweater at a door she was supposed to leave. Madison knew only a little more. She had read the packet on the drive over, seen the language Preston's team had used, clean and cold enough to make cruelty sound like procedure. Voluntary surrender. Possession transfer. Personal items to be removed by noon. Nothing in the packet mentioned the years Evelyn gave to that house before it became an asset. Nothing mentioned the winter she slept in a chair beside Preston's mother after surgery. Nothing mentioned the night Preston signed his first seven-figure contract while Evelyn stood in the kitchen washing champagne glasses alone. On the phone, Preston's fiancée leaned closer, her diamond catching the penthouse light. Preston tilted the screen, making sure Evelyn could see the view behind him, the marble counter, the skyline, the distance between where he was and where he thought she belonged. "This can still be dignified," he said, as if dignity were something he could permit her to keep. Evelyn looked at him, then at the tulips visible through the open doorway behind her. Their white petals trembled in the draft. She remembered the first bouquet Preston had ever brought home, wrapped in grocery store plastic, handed to her with paint on his wrist and hope in his voice. That man was gone. Or maybe he had only been easier to love before power gave him better lighting. Madison's phone remained in her hand. Her thumb hovered over the email as if touching it might make it less real. Grant noticed her pale expression and turned sharply. "Miss Blake," he asked. Madison swallowed, but she did not answer him. Her eyes lifted past him to Evelyn, no longer with pity, no longer with professional distance, but with the startled recognition of someone who had just realized the woman in the doorway was not standing at the end of something. She was standing at the beginning. Madison had seen important names before. She had typed them into settlement drafts, watched them appear on conference room screens, heard senior partners lower their voices when those names entered a building. But she had never seen a name change the air on a front porch. Evelyn Carter stood 3 feet away from her, holding an eviction notice in one hand and a fountain pen in the other, as calm as if Grant Holloway had come to discuss landscaping instead of removing her from her home. Grant did not understand the pause. Men like Grant trusted procedure the way other people trusted prayer. If a paper had a seal, if a client had paid the retainer, if a partner had approved the file, then the world was supposed to move in the direction he pointed. He extended another folder toward Evelyn and tapped the signature line with one manicured finger. "This is the acknowledgement of voluntary surrender," he said. "Signing it will make the transition easier." From the sport utility vehicle, Preston gave a soft laugh through the phone speaker. "For once, Evelyn, do the practical thing." The word practical carried years inside it. Practical had meant smile at dinners when investors ignored her. Practical had meant let Preston talk over her because he was under pressure. Practical had meant accept the first settlement offer because fighting would look bitter. Practical had meant shrink beautifully, quietly, and on schedule. Evelyn took the folder, opened it, and looked down at the page. Rain tapped the porch roof in a patient rhythm. Across the street, the gardener had stopped pretending to work. A woman in a navy raincoat paused beside her mailbox. Someone's golden retriever sat on the wet sidewalk, leash slack, sensing that the humans had entered a silence too sharp to disturb. Madison's phone screen was still lit. The email remained open. Effective immediately. Chairwoman, Holloway and Pierce Legal Group. Her mouth went dry. She looked at Grant, then at Evelyn, then at the firm logo stamped on the folder in her own arms. The logo suddenly felt less like a shield and more like evidence. Evelyn did not sign the surrender form. Instead, she reached into the narrow drawer of the entry table beside the door and removed a single document printed on heavy white paper. It had been folded once, cleanly, with a blue tab at the bottom marking the signature line. Grant's expression tightened. "What is that?" Evelyn placed the document on top of his folder and uncapped her pen. Board authority confirmation, she said. Her voice was low, even, almost gentle. Preston's smile flickered on the screen. Bored of what? Evelyn did not answer him. She signed her name with slow precision, the ink dark and steady, each letter formed without hesitation. Evelyn Carter. Not Evelyn Whitmore. Not Mrs. Preston Whitmore. Not the woman he had left behind in a house he thought he could turn into a stage. Just Evelyn Carter, written as if the name had finally returned to its rightful owner. Grant stared at the signature, irritation sharpening his jaw. Mrs. Carter, this is not the document I asked you to sign. I know, Evelyn said. She slid the paper toward Madison, not Grant. That small choice landed harder than any insult could have. Madison took it with both hands. Her eyes moved over the header, the acquisition date, the voting rights, the emergency appointment clause. She inhaled once, quietly. Grant heard it then, the sound of an associate discovering that the floor beneath her senior partner had disappeared. Preston leaned closer to his phone. What is going on? No one answered immediately. Evelyn stepped back from the threshold, leaving the door open behind her. Inside, the white tulips stood on the dining table, bright against the gray morning, untouched by the rain. For years, Preston had mistaken her quiet for emptiness. Grant had mistaken her courtesy for weakness. Even Madison, kind as she was, had arrived expecting a woman who needed pity. But Evelyn had not opened the door to beg for time. She had opened it to see who came. The truth on that porch had not appeared that morning. It had been built in silence, night after night, long after the divorce papers were signed and Preston stopped pretending to feel guilty. The first month after he left, Evelyn slept in a rented apartment above a bakery in West Hartford, where the heat clicked too loudly and the hallway smelled like sugar before sunrise. She owned 2 suitcases, 1 winter coat, and a stack of legal documents she could barely read without feeling the old humiliation rise in her throat. During the divorce, Preston's lawyers had spoken around her as if she were furniture left behind in the wrong room. They used words like equitable distribution, valuation discount, restricted access, preliminary injunction, and marital asset conversion. Every sentence sounded polished. Every polished sentence took something from her. She remembered sitting across a mahogany conference table while Grant Holloway slid papers toward her and said, "This is a reasonable outcome, Mrs. Whitmore." Reasonable meant the lake house disappeared into a holding company. Reasonable meant Preston's business interests became too complicated to divide. Reasonable meant the woman who had answered payroll emails from a hospital waiting room and balanced vendor invoices at the kitchen counter was suddenly described as having no operational role. Evelyn signed because she was exhausted. She signed because grief had made her quiet. She signed because everyone in that room seemed to know a language she had never been allowed to learn. Then, one cold morning, while standing in line for coffee with $7 left in her checking account until Friday, she decided she would never again be the only person at a table who did not understand the paper in front of her. She began with books from the public library, then online courses, then night classes in corporate finance. She worked as an operations consultant for small businesses that were too tired to fail and too proud to ask for help. She sat in diners at 10 o'clock at night with spreadsheets open beside half-finished cups of coffee, learning the shape of debt, the timing of leverage, the quiet power of voting rights. She learned how companies were bought without anyone changing the sign on the door. She learned how a loan could become control. She learned how a signature could close a cage or open one. There were no victory posts, no champagne photos, no public statements aimed at Preston. Her revenge did not wear red lipstick and shout across a ballroom. It wore reading glasses at 1 in the morning and highlighted clauses until the ink stained her fingertips. Some nights, the loneliness was so complete that even the refrigerator humming in the corner sounded like company. But freedom had a sound too. It sounded like her own name at the top of an invoice. It sounded like rent paid early. It sounded like a client saying, "We trust your judgment, Evelyn." Slowly, the woman Preston had underestimated became fluent in the language he once used to erase her. By the time Alexander Reed first noticed her across a restructuring meeting in Boston, she was no longer trying to look unbroken. She had become something quieter than confidence and harder to dismiss. She had become prepared. And now, on the wet porch of the house Preston thought he was taking back, Grant Holloway stared at her signature without knowing he was looking at 3 years of sleepless discipline, 36 months of swallowed grief, and a woman who had learned every locked door by studying the hinges. Alexander Reed first heard Evelyn Carter speak in a glass conference room on the 42nd floor of a Boston tower, where everyone else had come prepared to watch a struggling medical supply company collapse politely. The room smelled of espresso, raincoats, and expensive confidence. 12 people sat around the table with laptops open and faces arranged into professional sympathy. But Evelyn sat near the far end with a yellow legal pad, a plain black pen, and the stillness of someone who had already read the ending and found a better one. The company owed more than $18 million. Its warehouse lease was underwater, and its board was ready to sell the pieces for less than the value of the trucks in the parking lot. One consultant called the failure unavoidable. Another recommended layoffs before Thanksgiving. Evelyn waited until the room had finished admiring its own certainty, then turned one page on her pad. "The problem is not the debt," she said. "The problem is who has been allowed to define it." No one interrupted her after that. She walked them through vendor terms, inventory timing, convertible notes, and a financing structure that preserved jobs without asking anyone to pretend the numbers were kinder than they were. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform intelligence. She simply placed facts in the center of the room until everyone had to lean toward them. Alexander Reed watched from the opposite side of the table, one hand resting near his untouched coffee. He was known for buying distressed companies before other people noticed they still had a pulse, but what interested him that morning was not the company. It was Evelyn. After the meeting, while the others disappeared into elevators and phone calls, he found her standing near the windows, looking down at traffic moving through wet streets like strings of red light. "You could have charged twice as much for that plan," he said. Evelyn did not turn right away. "I charged what they could survive." Alexander smiled, not amused, but impressed. "Most people in our business prefer comfort." She finally looked at him. "Comfort did not teach me anything useful. That was the beginning. Not romance wrapped in grand gestures, not rescue disguised as affection, but a professional respect that arrived with documents, questions, and doors that opened because she had earned the key." Alexander introduced her to restructuring deals larger than anything she had handled before. He sent her filings, acquisition histories, and lender reports, and she returned them marked with notes sharp enough to change strategy. Months later, he placed a gray folder in front of her at a quiet restaurant in Back Bay, beside a cup of black coffee and a window fogged by winter. "There is a firm you may recognize," he said. Evelyn opened the folder and saw the name before she saw the numbers. Holloway and Pierce Legal Group. For a moment, the sound of silverware, voices, and traffic softened around her. The firm Preston had trusted like a weapon was bleeding money behind marble walls. A failed expansion in Dallas. 2 major clients gone. Partner disputes buried under polished announcements. Debt sold quietly at a discount because no one wanted the embarrassment public. Alexander did not touch the folder. "You do not have to look at it." Evelyn kept reading. Page after page, the firm that once made her feel powerless became a balance sheet, then a structure, then a door. Preston saw their name and imagined protection. Evelyn saw leverage. By spring, through a private investment vehicle under her control, she had purchased enough distressed debt to force a restructuring conversation. By early summer, the debt converted into voting power. By the night before Grant appeared on her porch, the board had approved emergency authority and appointed Evelyn Carter as chairwoman with final oversight of compliance, client conflicts, and executive conduct. She signed the acceptance at her dining table, the same table where white tulips now stood in the gray morning light. She slept for 3 hours, woke before sunrise, made coffee, and arranged the flowers because dignity, she had learned, did not need a witness to be real. And while Preston ordered a moving truck to make her small, an email carrying her name was traveling through the very firm he had sent to her door. The email had arrived at 7:45 in the morning, while Grant Holloway was already in the back seat of the black sport utility vehicle, reviewing the eviction packet as if it were a weather report. His driver had turned onto Interstate 84 under a low gray sky, and Grant had silenced his phone because he did not like interruptions before a client-facing action. In the passenger seat, Madison Blake had tucked her own phone into her coat pocket after answering one message from her mother and one from the office calendar. She had not opened the internal announcement. She had not seen the subject line marked urgent. Across the city, at Holloway and Pierce Legal Group, the email moved quietly from inbox to inbox, passing through marble reception desks, corner offices, paralegal stations, and conference rooms still dark before the first meetings of the day. Effective immediately, Evelyn Carter had been appointed chairwoman, with full authority over compliance, conflicts, client representation, and executive review. Some employees read it while holding paper cups of coffee. One junior attorney blinked twice and whispered her name under his breath. A receptionist looked toward the elevators as if expecting the building itself to explain. But the three attorneys sent to Evelyn's door kept driving, sealed inside procedure, 22 minutes ahead of the truth they should have carried with them. Preston, meanwhile, was not thinking about emails. He was standing in his penthouse kitchen in Manhattan, wearing a white dress shirt open at the collar, watching his fiancée choose between two champagne flutes for a celebration that had not yet earned the word. His phone leaned against a marble fruit bowl, showing him the front porch in Connecticut through Grant's video call. He wanted proof. He wanted the moment saved in memory, not because the house mattered most, but because he needed to see Evelyn standing outside of it. Men like Preston did not always destroy what they no longer loved. Sometimes they simply needed to make sure it could not stand without them. He had told himself the house was business. The market was strong. The asset should be liquidated. The past should be cleared. Yet he had scheduled the moving truck himself, paid extra for an early arrival, and asked Grant to keep the call open. That was not business. That was theater. On the porch, that theater began to fall out of rhythm. Madison's face changed first. Not dramatically, not enough for the neighbors to understand, but enough for Evelyn to notice. The young attorney lowered her eyes to the document Evelyn had signed, then back to the glowing message on her phone. Grant was still trying to hold the old scene together. "Miss Blake," he said, sharper this time. "Is there a problem?" Madison looked at him, and the professional mask she had worn all morning slipped. "Sir," she said softly, "you need to read the firm announcement." Grant's mouth tightened. Now is not the time. Evelyn placed the signed board authority confirmation on top of the surrender form, aligning the edges with quiet care. "Actually," she said, "now is exactly the time." Rain ran from the porch roof in thin streams. Preston's smile disappeared from the phone screen. Grant took Madison's phone, glanced at the first line, and the color drained from the morning. Evelyn Carter, chairwoman, immediate authority. The words did not shout. They did not need to. They simply stood there, official and irreversible, while the moving truck waited at the curb with nothing to take. Grant Holloway read the announcement once, then again, as if the second reading might give him a different world. The rain kept falling with quiet indifference. A delivery van rolled slowly past the curb, its driver glancing toward the porch where three attorneys, one moving truck, one open phone call, and one woman in a cream sweater had suddenly become part of a scene none of them knew how to finish. Madison stood beside Grant with both hands clasped around the folder, her knuckles pale against the black leather. She had joined Holloway and Pierce because she believed the firm represented power with discipline. She had worked late, answered weekend emails, and memorized the careful language partners used when they wanted decisions to sound inevitable. But now she saw the difference between law and intimidation, between procedure and performance, between a document meant to resolve a matter and a document designed to humiliate someone before breakfast. Grant lowered the phone, but not enough to hide the screen. Evelyn's name remained there, bright and official. Chairwoman. Full authority. Effective immediately. The title sat in the damp morning like a key turned in a lock. From inside the sport utility vehicle, Preston's voice sharpened. "Grant, what is happening?" Grant did not answer him. For the first time since arriving, he looked at Evelyn not as a former spouse, not as a file, not as a woman standing between him and a completed task, but as the person with final authority over the firm whose name was printed on every page he carried. His posture changed before his words did. His shoulders drew back. His chin lowered slightly. The shift was small, but everyone saw it. Even the neighbor in the navy raincoat stopped pretending to check her mailbox. Evelyn did not step forward. She did not enjoy the fear arriving on Grant's face, and that made the moment heavier. Cruel people often expected revenge to look like celebration. Evelyn offered only composure. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "is your firm currently representing Mr. Whitmore in an action against me?" Grant's lips parted, then closed. Madison looked down. The answer was standing between them in wet shoes. Yes, Grant said at last, the word dry and thin. Evelyn nodded once, as if confirming the time on a clock. And did your team review the updated conflict disclosures before initiating this action? Grant looked at Madison. Madison looked at the folder. The silence answered for both of them. Preston's face filled the phone screen now, too close to the camera, his polished confidence beginning to split at the edges. Evelyn, he said, forcing a laugh that had no warmth left in it. Whatever this is, you are overplaying it. She turned her eyes to him then, not with anger. Anger would have given him a place to stand. She looked at him with the calm distance of someone recognizing a storm from a house already rebuilt. Preston, she said, for years, you confused access with ownership. The words settled softly, but they reached everyone. The moving truck driver shifted beside the curb. Madison swallowed. Grant stared at the eviction notice in Evelyn's hand, suddenly aware that the paper looked less like authority and more like liability. Preston tried to smile again, but the effort failed. You cannot just take over my attorneys, he said. Evelyn did not blink. No, she said. I took over the firm. Madison's phone buzzed again. This time, she looked. Another internal message had arrived from compliance, requesting immediate suspension of all active matters involving Evelyn Carter pending review. Madison read it, then lifted her eyes to Grant. Sir, she said quietly, we have been ordered to stop. The rain filled the space after her words. Grant looked at the open doorway, the tulips on the dining table, the surrender form lying and signed beneath Evelyn's document. Then, slowly, he closed Preston's file. Evelyn stepped back into the entryway, not to retreat, but to reach the old black telephone that still sat on the narrow table beside the staircase. Preston had wanted to replace it years ago with something sleek and wireless, but Evelyn had kept it because it reminded her of slower mornings, of rain tapping glass, of a time when a ringing phone did not always mean someone wanted something from her. Now she lifted the receiver with the same calm she used to lift a coffee cup. Grant watched her as if every small movement had become a legal event. Madison stood beside him, holding the closed file against her chest. Inside the sport utility vehicle, Preston leaned toward the screen, his voice no longer smooth. Evelyn, what are you doing? She did not answer him. She dialed the main number of Holloway and Pierce Legal Group from memory, the number printed on every letter that had once made her stomach tighten. The line clicked twice. A receptionist answered with practiced brightness. Holloway and Pierce Legal Group. How may I direct your call? Evelyn looked at Grant when she spoke. This is Evelyn Carter. Put me through to compliance. The silence on the other end changed shape. A keyboard stopped clicking. A chair shifted. Then the receptionist's voice returned, softer, steadier, and completely different. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman. One moment, please. The words traveled across the porch like a bell no one could unhear. Madam Chairwoman. Grant lowered his eyes. Madison exhaled so quietly it almost disappeared beneath the rain. In the vehicle, Preston went still. For the first time that morning, his penthouse, his marble counters, his fiancée, his champagne, all of it seemed far away from the woman standing inside the house he thought he could empty by noon. Evelyn waited with the receiver against her ear, one hand resting lightly on the table where the surrender form still lay unsigned. When the compliance director came on the line, his voice carried the careful urgency of someone who had read every word of the announcement and understood what it meant. Madam Chairwoman, we have already flagged the Whitmore matter. We are prepared to suspend action immediately. Do it, Evelyn said. Notify conflicts. Preserve every communication. Assign an independent review team. No one destroys notes, drafts, call logs, or internal messages. Grant closed his eyes for half a second. The instruction was professional, not emotional, but it landed with more force than anger. Evelyn continued, and confirmed that Mr. Holloway and his team have no authority to proceed at this property. A pause. Then the compliance director answered, clear enough for everyone near the doorway to hear. Confirmed. All action must stop immediately. Preston found his voice again, but it came out thinner. This is absurd. That firm works for me. Evelyn turned toward the phone screen. It represented you, she said. There is a difference. His fiancée had moved out of frame. The bright room behind him looked suddenly too large. Preston looked not at Grant, but at Evelyn. as if trying to locate the woman who used to explain his calendar, soften his mistakes, and accept his version of events because it was easier than fighting a room full of men paid to make her feel uninformed. That woman was gone. Not ruined. Not hardened beyond recognition. Simply gone from his reach. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it again. Evelyn placed the receiver back into its cradle. The soft click sounded final. "Mr. Halloway," she said, "please instruct the moving company to leave my driveway." Grant turned toward the curb, where the driver stood under the lifted rear door, one hand in his jacket pocket, waiting for someone else to decide what his morning had become. Grant lifted a hand and gave a small, defeated signal. The driver nodded, pulled the truck door down, and the metal latch closed with a dull sound that rolled through the wet street. Evelyn looked at Preston one last time through the glowing screen. He looked smaller now, not because she had shamed him, but because she had stopped carrying the illusion that he was large. Then Madison's phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. The subject line was simple. "Emergency board review initiated." The moving truck pulled away first, its tires hissing softly over the wet pavement, leaving behind 2 faint tracks of water and a silence wide enough for every neighbor to understand that something had changed without knowing exactly what it was. Grant Halloway stood on the porch with the closed file under one arm, no longer the man who had arrived to command a doorway, but a senior partner waiting for instruction from the woman he had been sent to remove. Madison Blake looked at Evelyn with an expression that carried embarrassment, respect, and a quiet kind of relief. She had seen powerful people demand apologies before. She had seen them turn small victories into public performances. Evelyn did neither. She simply gathered the unsigned surrender form, placed it inside the cream envelope, and handed it back to Grant. "This document will not be used today," she said. Grant accepted it with both hands. "Madam Chairwoman," he began, and the title seemed to cost him something. "We will fully cooperate with compliance." Evelyn nodded once. "You will also notify Mr. Whitmore in writing that the firm has suspended representation in this matter pending conflict review." From the phone screen, Preston made a sound too sharp to be a laugh and too uncertain to be confidence. "Evelyn, you are making a mistake." She looked at him through the small, glowing rectangle, and for the first time all morning, there was almost sadness in her eyes. Not longing, not regret, only the quiet sadness of seeing clearly what she had once loved through fog. "No, Preston," she said. "The mistake was believing I needed your permission to remain standing." His fiancée did not return to the frame. The champagne stayed unopened somewhere behind him. Grant ended the call after receiving a direct instruction from compliance, and Preston disappeared without the dramatic final word he had expected to own. On the porch, the rain softened into mist. The gardener across the street restarted his mower, slower this time, as if even the machine had learned caution. The woman by the mailbox turned away. Curtains closed. Ordinary life, embarrassed by what it had witnessed, tried to resume. Evelyn stepped back into the house and looked at the entryway. The staircase still held faint marks from the years when she had carried laundry baskets, holiday garlands, and Preston mother prescriptions up those steps. The dining room still held the table where she had signed the paper that changed the firm before sunrise. The white tulips leaned slightly toward the gray window light, delicate and unafraid. She did not need to keep the house to prove she belonged in it. That was the part Preston would never understand. Ownership was not the same as freedom. Winning was not the same as healing. She walked to the kitchen, poured the cold coffee from her mug into the sink, and rinsed it slowly. Then she returned to the porch with her car keys in hand. Madison remained at the bottom step. "Is there anything else you need from us?" she asked. Evelyn looked past her to the empty curb where the truck had been. "Yes," she said. "Begin the review. Start with every communication involving this property, every instruction from Mr. Whitmore, and every person who approved a public removal without confirming authority." Madison gave a small nod. Grant lowered his eyes. Evelyn locked the front door behind her, not because she had been forced out, but because she was choosing when to leave. She walked down the wet path with no boxes, no apology, and no backward glance until she reached the gate. Only then did she look once at the house that had taught her how much a promise could cost. The porch light glowed in the rain like a small moon. Evelyn slipped the key into her coat pocket and smiled faintly. She had not taken revenge by taking everything from him. She had taken back the one thing he never thought she would own again, herself.